Hello again. This short video is going to talk about the ways that we'll be organizing our persuasive speeches in this class. Now there are several different ways that you can organize your persuasive speech. There are a lot of patterns out there for organizing the body of our speeches. However, in this class, I want you to choose from one of two methods. The two methods we're going to talk about are going to be called problem solution and Monroe's motivated sequence. You should be able to find some really good information about Monroe's motivated sequence in the text. The problem solution is not the best description I've ever read in the textbook, so we'll go over that pretty in depth here. First off, let's talk about problem solution. In a problem solution part of your speech, remember when we're talking about organization patterns for specific speeches, we're talking about how to organize the body of our speech. There's always going to be an introduction and conclusion. This is just talking about how to talk about the main information we're sharing. When we're giving a problem solution type of speech, there are four things we need to talk about. We need to establish the problem. We need to talk about the harms or the effects of the problem, the causes of the problem, and the solutions to the problem. So let's go through those individually. First off, when you're describing the problem, you need to be very focused and specific about the problem you're trying to solve. Don't just say, I'm trying to solve the problem of homelessness, because in a 5 to 7 minute speech, you're not going to be able to solve homelessness, right? So let's be more specific. I'm trying to decrease homelessness here in Calhoun or here in Rome or wherever it might be, right? So have a specific problem that you're trying to solve. The second thing that we're going to be needing to try and figure out are the harms or the effects of the problem. Okay, so we've established the problem, and basically when we're establishing that problem, we need to say this is a problem and this is proof that this problem exists. Okay, so you can't just say homelessness is a problem. You need to say homelessness in Calhoun is a problem. Here are some statistics, here are some examples, here are some stories. Basically, you need to create some kind of an argument to make your audience believe that yes, in fact, there is a problem. Then we move on to talking about the harms and the effects of that problem. So if homelessness is a problem and we believe you that it's a problem, what are the bad things that happen because of homelessness? Some of those harms might be obvious harms to the people who are homeless. There might be some harms to people who end up having to pay higher taxes to help to pay for some of these homeless shelters or things like that. There might be additional effects that we wouldn't think about, like if the homelessness rate is up, then the unemployment rate is up, and if the unemployment rate is up, then that influences X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. So think about taking your problem a step farther, not just who is hurt by this problem, but how are other people additionally hurt by this problem. The third thing we're going to need to talk about with problem solution method is going to be the causes. And basically this is taking a step backwards from looking at the problem. So we say, okay, what happened that made this problem occur, right? So if the problem is homelessness, we maybe need to look backwards a step and say, why do people become homeless? And that might be that there are domestic violence issues in a certain town, and that causes a high amount of homelessness. It might be that there are rampant drug issues, and that causes homelessness. It might be the unemployment rate causes homelessness. It might be bad mortgage policies cause homelessness, whatever it might be. So think about what happened that made your problem happen, okay? The last thing you do in a problem solution speech, and the last thing you need to think about, is going to be the solutions. Like we mentioned in a previous video, if you don't establish solutions to your problem, you're giving us an informative speech, and that's not good. So the solutions are going to be things that are actually going to fix the issues you're trying to solve, right? Which makes sense. And if you're thinking about that, one of the things you can think about is, what are some of the ways we can take away the causes of this problem? Okay, so if we're talking about the problem of homelessness, we're trying to fix homelessness, and one of the causes of homelessness is domestic violence, then one of our solutions might be that we need to try to end domestic violence in Calhoun or in Rome, whatever it might be, right? Or we need to decrease the amount of domestic violence that's going on. If we could do that, it would solve part of the problem of homelessness. So when you're looking for solutions, don't just always look directly at the problem and say, okay, this is exactly how I can solve it. Sometimes you need to look at the causes and stop those causes from happening. There are two ways that you can organize a problem solution type of speech. In version 1, the first body point that you'll have will talk about both the problems and the harms and the effects. The problems are going to be what you're mostly going to focus on. So in your preview statement, you'd say, we'll talk about the problems, causes, and solutions. Okay? However, in point 1, you still need to talk about the harms or the effects of the problem, because you need to establish why this is such a bad thing. We want to believe that the problem actually exists. We want to know why it hurts us or it hurts others. Your second point, then, you're going to talk about those causes. Why is the problem happening? And the third point, you're going to talk about solutions. So that's version 1. In version 2, it goes just a little bit differently. In version 2, you actually establish your problem in that introduction step. So during your introduction, you establish that there's a problem. Now, this is usually an effective version of the problem-solution method when your audience isn't going to have a lot of trouble believing that there is a problem, all right? If you're talking about the issues of surrounding mortgages in the United States today, I don't think you're going to have a lot of trouble convincing your audience that the mortgage-related laws are an issue and that they're a problem. So that's something you could probably introduce in your introduction and get us to believe, yes, this is a problem, I'm on board, this is what we're trying to solve, okay. Then in your body, your first point is going to be talking about the harms and the effects of the problem, okay. So instead of kind of burying that and melding that into one point, you put those into 2 separate areas, and it just depends on how much time you think it's going to take to convince your audience that a problem exists. And then the second and third point are going to be the same, the causes and solutions. That's the problem-solution method. The other method that you could use for a persuasive speech pattern is called Monroe's motivated sequence. And Monroe's motivated sequence is a little bit different than problem-solution. In problem-solution, you have a pretty clear-cut, cookie-cutter idea of what you're going to need to accomplish with your speech. You need to figure out those 4 things and then basically just plop them into those points for your speech. With Monroe's motivated sequence, it's a lot more free. You have a lot more freedom to be able to persuade your audience in a different way. And with Monroe's, it's less of a cookie cutter, this is what you need to do, and it's more of a checklist that you need to accomplish these 5 steps to make sure that you're persuading your audience, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can think about it. The one thing to think about with Monroe's, and the biggest mistake I usually see with Monroe's, is that people think that the 5 steps are the 5 points that you're going to be using for your audience. That's not what you want to do, okay? These 5 steps are going to be used through or in combination with another organization pattern to make sure that you actually are persuasive. So let's talk about the 5 steps. The first step is to gain attention. And this is a pretty obvious one. We need to gain attention no matter what speech we're giving, right? So that's always going to be something we're going to do in our introduction. Our second step is going to be establishing the need or problem. This is going to be very similar to that problem-solution first point we were talking about. So we need to establish specifically what it is that we're trying to solve for our audience. Because if we don't know what the problem is, how are we supposed to solve it? The third step is that we need to offer solutions, all right? And that makes sense too. If we have a problem, we need to offer some solutions as to how we can fix it, right? Makes sense, it's part of the persuasive process. The fourth step is one that a lot of students have trouble with. So this is one to really kind of think about, especially if you're considering using Monroe's motivated sequence. And your fourth step, what you're trying to do is you're trying to visualize the world as it would look if your solutions were enacted. So if the world finally all of a sudden said, okay, you know what? Everyone is going to recycle everything that we can, and we're going to decrease the amount of trash that we're using, right? What would that look like? What would that world look like? Would it be that we have lower energy costs? Would it be that we have lower manufacturing costs? Whatever it is. So think about when you're doing your visualization step using so let's picture this. And you maybe have you have your audience close their eyes, or you have them visualize the world in whatever way it's going to be different than how it is now, right? So use that visualization step to really help your audience see how the world would be different if your solutions were taken up by everybody. The last step in Monroe's motivated sequence is that we need to call our audience to action. So what we do is we say, okay, Now that you've heard all this information and you've heard all my arguments, it's your turn to act. It's your turn to make a difference in this world. So I'm going to try and get you in this step, calling audience to action step, to actually go out and change your belief or change your behavior. If you were making a sales pitch, this would be called closing the deal, right? So when you actually specifically call out your audience members and say, you should do this, this is why, and I'm going to call you to donate to the Red Cross today. I'm going to call you to donate to the March of Dimes today, whatever it might be. So let's take a look at how Monroe's motivated sequence might look if we were actually organizing a speech. I'm going to go through 4 different versions of this, but really the sky is the limit. There are so many different ways you can use Monroe's. Basically, all you need to do when you're using Monroe's is make sure that you're using all 5 of your steps. And especially with Monroe's, make sure you're labeling those steps so I know what you're talking about. First off, the first version here, what you can do is, and you'll notice I labeled these parts as introduction, body, and conclusion. The first thing that you want to think about is in your introduction, maybe you're going to gain attention. And you're going to notice that with each version that we're using, that the gaining attention always takes place in your introduction. And that makes sense, right? The first part of every introduction is to gain attention. So that's where we're going to do that step. The body points that we might use might be with version 1 of how to use Monroe's. We might do step 2 where we establish the problem in point 1, use step 3 in point 2, and visualize the world in step 3 or in point 3, right? So we've done steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 throughout this introduction and body part. And then we maybe would use the audience action in our conclusion. That might be one way that we could go about using Monroe's, okay? Another way that we might use it is we might complete steps 1 and 2 in our introduction. We might try to gain our audience's attention and establish the problem in the introduction, depending on how difficult it is going to be to establish that problem. And then in our body, we might offer solutions 1 and 2. Maybe the solutions we have to the problems are a little bit more in depth, that they require some more understanding. So we need to take more time for them, for our audience members to be able to understand how these solutions would work. So maybe we'd have one point we talk about one solution, a second point we talk about a second solution. And then in our conclusion, maybe we have the visualization and audience action steps. That might be another way that we could organize Monroe's. A couple of more versions here. And again, this is just to get you thinking about how you could use this as your organization pattern. In version 3, maybe you would gain attention in your audience, or gain attention in your introduction rather. In your body points, you maybe would establish your problems in your first point, offer solutions in your second and third point, and then your conclusion, maybe your visualization step is pretty short. So maybe that's a part of your conclusion, and your audience action is a part of your conclusion as well. A 4th version might look like that in your introduction, you are gaining attention and then establishing the problem in your introduction. Maybe body point 1, you offer a solution or solutions. Point 2, your visualization, you're having your visualization step. And then your 3rd point, maybe you're calling your audience to action there. Maybe there are some specific actions you want your audience to take, and it's going to take longer than what you're going to be able to accomplish in your conclusion. So think about that. There are a lot of different ways you can use Monroe's. It's a lot more free, and especially if you've got a little bit more of an abstract topic that you're talking about, Monroe's can be a really useful way to organize that speech. So I hope this has been helpful.